Let's stop excessive government spending and allow prices to go down for a change.
And I fear that the top priority here isn't the budget of the family struggling to afford their groceries or the budget of the seniors skipping meals to keep the heat on. No, I fear the top priority is the state's budget.
It's been fascinating to hear our colleagues on the other side of the aisle continuing to point out the immediacy of the relief needed, while simultaneously fighting for a tax cut for the wealthiest Michiganders that would give crumbs to those who need it most. These are the groups of people that we are trying to help right now. People who are trying to buy their first house. People are trying to feed their kids. People who are trying to give their family the life that they deserve. Some of us in this room can be fired from their jobs simply because of who they are. Some of the people in this room can be denied an apartment or a house, not because of sexual desires or actions, but simply because of who they are. And we have an historic opportunity today to right a wrong that should have been righted decades ago. Today I'm thinking of everyone who has been devastated by gun violence and everyone who has vowed not to accept this devastation as normal. Today I'm thinking of all of the children who have had their childhoods suddenly and violently ripped from them, who have had to grow up, who have lost their innocence and too often feel forced to become activists.
This amendment will keep Michigan's partial birth abortion ban on the books. One may argue that this procedure rarely happens, but that does not mean that we should not have a law prohibiting it. Many of our state laws criminalize conduct that rarely happens. That is the whole point. Making rare but reprehensible conduct illegal is part of why we have criminal laws in the first place. This is a procedure where a child is delivered, so part of their body is out of their womb, and their brains are sucked out, and its head is crushed. Repealing this law is entirely unjustified and barbaric.
Quote, partial birth abortion is not a medical term at all. It was created by the National Right to Life Council in 1995 in the wake of a newly developed procedure, the D&E, which is the most commonly used procedure in a later abortion. We heard the previous speaker speak about the gore of the procedure in a way that really dehumanizes and demonizes the people who suddenly find themselves having to make a decision that they never anticipated they might have to make. And we lead with compassion for the two people in the state who found themselves facing a decision that, God willing, none of us in this room will ever have to experience. That after you've already carried a pregnancy for months, after you've picked out a name, after you've sent out cards to your family introducing your soon-to-be new member of the family, after you've painted their room, after you've picked out furniture, that the pregnancy is not compatible with life.
And after hearing about these bloodthirsty attacks by Hamas, Congresswoman Tlaib initially issued a statement placing part of the blame on Israel, repeatedly calling Israel an apartheid government, and even placed some of the blame on our country's aid to them. She's entitled to her opinions and may espouse them freely, regardless of how grotesque they may be, but she's not fit to serve. She's not fit to represent the people of Michigan in Congress, and she should resign.
What a shameful weaponization of a horrific war to try to score political points to divide Democrats against Democrats. For shame. You don't care about the Congresswoman's constituents in Detroit. You don't care about the Congresswoman's constituents in Oakland County. You don't care. We have seen rising anti-Semitism. We have seen rising Islamophobia. We have seen attacks on children. We saw a child murdered in Chicago. We saw a woman drive her car into a building thinking that it was a Jewish center. And the focus from the other side of the aisle is to expel a member of Congress, not addressing any of the real safety issues, not addressing any of the valid fears and anger and hatred and concerns of the people that we represent, to focus on one member of Congress.
I was just reading an interesting article in Bridge Magazine about Grand Rapids Public Schools having the fourth child, the third grader, bringing a gun in a backpack. What they've did is, let's ban the backpacks. I just called the reporter. Do you have any information on charges? Because we constantly hear this, that this is the schools bringing charges to the prosecutor. Let's get tough on these guns. Sounds like there was not charges. They're pondering on the charges against these parents. There needs to be a lot more done with school safety, and this will help. Thank you.
In response to our previous colleague, it's interesting that so many in this room voted no on legislation that was signed into law to require the safe storage of those firearms, to require the owners of those guns to secure their firearms in the home so that kids can't get access to them, and then complain that charges are not filed. And yet you voted against the very laws that would give the prosecutors something to charge the parents with. Providing trauma kits, as this amendment would do, acknowledges that you accept a reality where kids have to prepare to be shot. Vote no on this amendment. We shouldn't be voting on this today. We should be singularly focused on what happened this week. And we wanted to take up this bill on Thursday, but our colleagues on the other side of the aisle decided to pull a cute trick instead. So here we are a few days later, when we've been trying to give those impacted by inflation the most immediate relief, and we're doing so today. What can't be debated is that inflation currently is coming down. The efforts that the Fed are taking are aggressive, but they are working to slow it. What can't be argued is that there are significant groups of people who are impacted most, and these are the groups of people that we are trying to help right now. People who are trying to buy their first house. People are trying to feed their kids. People who are trying to give their family the life that they deserve. In order for us to be able to get there, we need to make sure that we are focusing our relief efforts on those who need it, not exacerbating income inequality, not giving crumbs year after year after year to families who need it now. And by the way, this tax cut, when written, did not factor in the global pandemic that we went through that would result in, yes, $9 billion, most of which is one-time funding. One-time funding that we have right now to make generational investments and to put dollars back in people's pockets who need it the most. But it would be irresponsible to consider a permanent tax cut that does not factor in one-time spending, that makes permanent cuts to necessary resources, to our schools, to our health services, to the things that the very people that we should be helping the most need, the things that the very people we should be helping the most expect that their hard-earned tax dollars pay for. I encourage a yes vote on this legislation, a yes vote that we should have taken on Thursday, and I ask that my remarks be printed in the Journal. I will never forget the day that the United States Supreme Court decided on marriage equality. I remember taking pictures of sidewalk chalk. I remember taking pictures of the celebrations that occurred around me. And this was something that didn't impact my life in any way. It didn't make my life any better. It didn't make my life any worse. But I recognized in that moment that finally my friends and my neighbors had the same rights that I've had. I am a straight Catholic woman married to a straight Jewish man. Because of who we are, I cannot be fired from my job. My husband cannot be fired from his job. We cannot be denied a mortgage. We cannot be denied housing. The reality is that most of us in this room today enjoy those same protections. But some of us in this room today do not. Every single one of us in this room has to recognize that granting those around us more rights and more protections does nothing to strip away our own rights and protections. This is an incredibly proud day for the state of Michigan, a state that is signaling to the rest of the country that no matter who you are welcome here. You will be protected here. You can find a job, a career, doing what you love, and a place and a community that you can call home. I'm incredibly proud and grateful to this legislature and my colleague for working on this for so many years, and I'm proud to stand in support of this today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Back in 2019, after we first introduced a version of this legislation alongside then State Representative Robert Wittenberg, who himself had introduced this earlier versions of extreme risk protection orders years before, I hosted a roundtable discussion on red flag laws in my district in Berkeley. This panel intentionally featured no legislators, but did include a woman named Mary Miller Strobel. Mary spoke about her brother, Ben. She said, quote, "My brother and I started the summer each year jumping into Lake Michigan on Memorial Day weekend. He was my hero," she said. He was a hero to a lot of other people too. Ben was a combat veteran. After he returned home, he was suffering. Ben had lost 30 pounds after his tour. Returning home, his father asked him about the weight loss, and Ben replied that he couldn't eat. He said, quote, "It's just too hard out there, Dad. It smells like death." Ben was seeking treatment at the local VA, but his family, including Mary, were worried. Mary said that she and her dad drove to every local gun store showing the owners pictures of Ben. They pleaded with the owners, "Please, please do not sell him a gun." Ben died by suicide, using a gun that he bought at a local gun store. Mary and her dad knew. They saw the warning signs. They knew that Ben needed help. He needed time. A red flag law could have bought them that time. A red flag law could have saved Ben's life. A few weeks ago in committee, we met Karen and Michael Kobelik, who Senator Bayer previously spoke about. Karen said, quote, "I am a mother of triplets who should be turning 23 next week. Last year, my child Ruby shot and killed my son Bishop, then shot and killed their significant other, then shot and killed themselves." Karen went on to explain that she was not here to excuse Ruby's behavior, but she knows that it did not need to happen. Not like this. Karen learned that when Ruby turned 21, she bought a gun. This was after Karen had explained that Ruby had suffered from mental illness from a young age. She had a spectrum disorder, major depressive order, and a history of self-harming, among others. Karen said, quote, "I subscribe to the philosophy, know something, say something. So I called the police over and over and over again. And every single time I was told that they could not and they would not revoke Ruby's Second Amendment right to own a gun." She said through tears, "I am Ruby's mother. I knew something was seriously wrong and that this was a dangerous situation." Only a few weeks prior to this horrific event, Ruby was involuntarily committed to a mental health hospital. I called the police again and again, and I begged them to take Ruby's guns away. I was still denied. She said that their whole family tried to help Ruby, and within weeks of discharge, Ruby went to a gun store and bought another gun. Michael, the husband, said, "In my wildest imagination, I would never think that I'd be sitting here today in front of you talking about this. I am also a firearm owner and a CPL owner, and frankly, before all of this, I thought procedures were in place to have prevented this. Had the ERPO been in place, 3 people would be alive today," he told us. These are the lives that could have been saved with the legislation we have before us today. Extreme risk protection orders can and do save lives. 6 out of every 10 gun deaths in the United States are suicides, and of those who attempt suicide by firearm, 90% are successful, a significantly higher percentage than attempts made via any other method. In fact, a vast majority of those who survive a suicide attempt do not go on to die by a subsequent suicide, meaning that that moment and the result of that first attempt is critical in determining the ultimate outcome for an individual who is in crisis. Here in Michigan, approximately half of all suicides are by firearm, and in 2019, there were 742 suicides by firearm, including 31 children. Based on what we've learned from states like Indiana and Connecticut, implementation of similar laws in Michigan could have resulted in dozens of these victims still being alive today. Colleagues, today marks the 5th year in a row that I've stood before this body with a resolution to commemorate and recognize Gun Violence Awareness Month. A lot has happened since the first time that I stood here with this resolution in 2019. Since 2019, gun violence has surpassed car accidents as the #1 cause of death for our children. Since 2019, we've seen devastation across our state, from the Oxford High School shooting to the Michigan State shooting, putting Michigan once again in the national headlines, with news reports that always begin, another shooting, this time in Michigan. Another, this time. Today also marks the 1-year anniversary of the Uvalde school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, in which a 19-year-old shot and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Children whose bodies were so badly mutilated by an AR-15 style rifle that parents were asked to come back and give DNA samples to assist authorities in identifying their own children. Today I'm thinking of Alexandria Verner, my constituent from Clawson, who was a junior at Michigan State when she was killed by a gunman just a few short months ago. I'm thinking of Detroit police officer Lauren Courts, a young father who was shot and killed by a 19-year-old with an AK-style semi-automatic pistol who left behind his 9-year-old daughter. Today I'm thinking of my childhood friend Nicole, whose older brother was shot and killed in the Virginia Tech shooting, devastating our community and their family forever. Today I'm thinking of Mary Miller and Karen Kobelik, 2 women who bravely told their stories of losing their loved ones, their brother, their children, to gun violence. This year, Wear Orange Weekend will take place June 2nd through 4th, in which we wear orange to honor and remember everyone we've lost to gun violence. Today, 5 years after I first introduced this resolution, I hope that this year will be different. I hope that this will be the very first year that this resolution will actually be adopted. That we as a body, as the Michigan Senate, will finally stand united in saying that we recognize the epidemic of gun violence, that we honor those that we've lost, and officially acknowledge June as Gun Violence Awareness Month and June 2nd through 4th as Wear Orange Day. And that we may recommit ourselves to doing everything we can to end the epidemic of gun violence, so that we may never have to hear the news reports that too often begin with such a familiar refrain: another shooting, this time.
Here we are again, and this time, for what is the final bill going to the governor's desk to become law, is a repeal of Michigan's partial birth abortion ban. I'm struggling greatly to understand why this law is being repealed and why Democrats have gone back and forth on this ban. I would greatly appreciate it if someone could explain to the people of Michigan why repealing our state's ban on partial birth abortion is necessary.
Our colleague mentioned that he would appreciate an explanation as to why repealing this language is necessary. And I'm glad to be able to stand here to fulfill that request. Now, to be clear, in the state of Michigan in 2021, in a state of 10 million people, there were exactly 2 abortions performed after 28 weeks. Now, when I was pregnant, I had a really terrifying moment very early on in my pregnancy. Just a few weeks after finding out that I was pregnant, I was bleeding a lot. I called my OBGYN, and they immediately told me to go to the emergency room. Even though I was only a few weeks pregnant, I was devastated. I was terrified that I might lose this pregnancy. And it surprised me how deeply I felt in that moment, given that it was so new to me. Now, I can only imagine how devastating it is taking the feeling that I felt just a few weeks in, magnified by months, not being weeks pregnant, but months pregnant, and finding out that something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. In 2019, this body attempted to push forward a ban on D&E procedures. And in 2019, I brought forward the story of constituents of mine, McCall and Jordan, who came to Lansing and met with many legislators one-on-one to share their own story. They had been married for about a year. They got pregnant. They wanted to be pregnant. They were so looking forward to bringing a child into the world. Everything was going well. Every appointment, every check-in, until the 20-week appointment revealed something absolutely devastating. The collagen simply was not developing. And their doctors advised then that if they decided to proceed with the pregnancy, that the fetus very likely would not survive, and that if it did, that their baby might only live a few days and only know a life of suffering, that a sneeze might break a rib, that any movement, any breath would be nothing but pain and agony. They made a decision that I don't think any of us could ever imagine. McCall and Jordan shared with me how every day from that point forward made it significantly worse. That their doctors, knowing that Michigan's law, as written, the partial birth abortion language, was so vague, so contradictory to even what is in federal law, that they said that their doctors were afraid to move forward in scheduling the procedure, that they might be arrested, that they might be demonized. They shared a story with me that Michigan's law required that they receive counseling and education, and that they were presented with images of healthy pregnancies. And McCall told me how needlessly cruel that was, because she was forced to view pictures of the pregnancy that she wanted, not the pregnancy that she had. As the previous speaker mentioned, there is already federal language related to limitations on this procedure. Michigan's go beyond that and are vague and confusing and might prohibit a doctor from using their best judgment to provide life-saving surgery, even in the case of a miscarriage. So in repealing Michigan's language, we default to the federal language, and we lead with compassion for the two people in the state who found themselves facing a decision that, God willing, none of us in this room will ever have to experience. In the interest of compassion, I ask for a no vote on this amendment.